able to introduce new generation capacity outside what ESCOM has to offer. So we know that since the removal of the licensing requirements, that there has been a massive pipeline of private investment in the electricity generation. And if you look at the Energy Action Plan, we do anticipate that the outcomes of the Energy Action Plan is to ensure that we are able to crowd in private sector participation on the generation side, so that they were able to broaden, if you like, generation. And it's not only the monopoly that is ESCOM, but also ESCOM is a market player in that space. So we have this pipeline has grown to about 10,000 megawatts. And we do expect that the first of these projects will be connected to the grid by the end of this calendar year. I think it's important that there has to be an appreciation that these projects are coming on stream, and by the end of this calendar year, we'll see the first generation of those projects being on stream. And also through NERSA has provided ministerial concurrence with regards to a concurrence to the ministerial determination of 14,771 megawatts of new generation capacity. And this will be coming from renewable energy sources, wind, solar, but more significantly now we're introducing battery storage, so that as we provide and roll out these renewable energy sources, they best approximate base load conditions by ensuring that there's battery storage. And this is consistent with the articulation of the Energy Integrated Resource Plan of 2019. The Minister of Finance has introduced a set of incentive for rooftop solar solution installation by households. And we're beginning to see, as I speak to you, evidence of people taking up this opportunity. We can see from the customs and registration data that, of course, we don't have sufficient manufacturing capacity in the country, and a lot of these panels are drawn in from outside. And one of the things that we will be doing, I think, as a ministry working with NECOM, is to ensure that over a period of time we're able to create a manufacturing capacity in the country, if you like, expand our industrial footprint, so that we're able to benefit from these incentives, that we don't just rely on imports. And in the course of doing that, of course, we're going to be able to absorb the employment, and of course we'll be able to address the challenge of unemployment, but also broaden the industrial base. So the point I'm making is that there's an opportunity also in this crisis. And then we're also working with National Treasuries to addressing and introducing, if you like, a loan guarantee scheme, because we know that small scale businesses, SMMEs, are finding very difficult to operate, and they don't have the upfront capital cost to do the kind of capital financing to benefit from the rollout of rooftop solar. So we're working on those facilities to make sure that you open up this space and you allow also SMMEs to benefit. And then we know that now the Minister of Finance has introduced that 254 fiscal relief to ESCOM, and which makes it possible for ESCOM to engage in a major capital investment. So part of the problem that has been confronting us in undermining our ability to ensure that we are able to improve the energy availability factor was a constraint on the ESCOM balance sheet, and in our inability of ESCOM to make the necessary investments to improve the energy availability factor. And Becky there and the team, they are hard at it, making sure that we are able to make these investments and improve the performance. And this is on the back of that fiscal relief that has been made possible by National Treasury. Minister Godhan is working very hard, flat out, on the introduction of, if you like, the transmission company. You know that we're introducing significant reform First, it's about those three entities, generation, transmission, and distribution, and we are making a significant progress. The critical milestones have been achieved in that regard, and we are confident that we should be in a position very shortly to appoint the board to operationalize the transmission entity. Minister Godan is a principal champion there. And then on the bid windows, Minister Mantashe, of course, is a custodian of the bid windows, is the one who goes out consistent with the parameters of the integrated resource plan. So now we can see that the 6 projects from bid window 5 have reached a financial close and are in construction as we speak now. With a further 7 projects from the same bid window, and 6 projects from bid window 6 currently on track to reach a financial close ASAP. And these they give us a combined 2,800 megawatts, and we are confident that these projects will begin to connect to the grid by 2024. One of the lessons that we have learned from the bid windows is the need for us to expand and strengthen grid capacity and to match, if you like, the location of this renewable energy project to areas that have got grid capacity, so that we are able to evacuate the electrons as and when they are available. So that's a lesson we've drawn from those bid windows, and we find that there's going to be an elegant exercise of matching of these projects with grid capacity. We're going out now, proposals are due in response to the battery storage request for proposal. This should be early by 2023, which is likely going to give us a further 513 megawatts. So battery storage, very important in ensuring that the excess capacity that we generate from renewables gets to charge the batteries, give us storage capacity as and when we reach the peaks, when some of the solar PVs are not available, we draw the energy from battery storage, and in that way we should be able to mitigate against load shedding. And then ESCOM is finalizing contracting close to 400 megawatts of energy through the standard offer and emergency generating programs, and with the 100 megawatts already added to the grid from Kelvin Power Station in Joburg. So the point we're making is that there has to be some degree of agency. You can see some of these projects that they have announced, they are only connecting end of the financial year, calendar year, I'm sorry, some of them next year, but we need to move with speed and address the issue that constitute an emergency as I speak to you, so that we are able to protect if you like, the South African economy, and ensure that we're able to get people into jobs, and the aspirations of growing the economy are not fatally harmed. I must say that we're also making progress in relation to retaining the 3 units at Kusile. As you know, the timelines that ESCOM has shared with us is that those 3 units, the unit 1, 2, 3, that were discontinued as a result of the structural integrity, the compromised structural integrity of the chimney at Kusile. And those units should be back by December of this year, and that's 2,100 megawatts. We're working very closely to return Unit 4 in Medupi that was taken out in August of 2021. Becky there, working with the competent team at Medupi, they found an accelerated path to get this unit up and running. And with those initiatives, we think that we should be getting that unit much earlier than expected. And of course, we continue to work on Unit 1 in Quebec, make sure that we don't extend the delays. We're able to get back that 980 megawatt to ensure that we were able to address the situation. Of course, colleagues, I did start by saying that the next 150 days will be very difficult. We know that we're entering the winter period. The expected increase will be anything from 32,000 megawatts to 37,000 megawatts. So we have to do something in the short term to ensure that we provide some degree of relief. What are we doing now to address, if you like, the winter situation. Just to lift a few, the first one is the work on improving the energy availability factor, if you like, the efficiency of the ESCOM power station is continuous. And we think confident that we're going to begin to see these improvements. I mean, Becky and the team, supported by the ESCOM board, had set a target of 60% EAF. Of course, that was undermined by the failure of those 3 units at Kusile. We continue to ensure that we undertake substantial maintenance. And we did that during the summer period. And we had seen temporarily some improvement in the 6 power stations. We really want to maintain that. Of course, we do have setbacks at sometimes this unit failing, our inability to return the unit on time as promised. So this is an area that is receiving attention. And then the second one was maximize the use of the open cycle gas turbines, working with Becky there on the generation side, led by the ESCOM board. We're doing everything possible. On Monday, or was it Tuesday, I was at Ankerleg meeting with the team there and making sure that there's a technical preparedness to help us to ensure that we are able to fully exploit the open cycle gas turbines. Of course, we'll be banning diesel. We know that in the 18% tariff increase that NERSA granted to ESCOM, there's 8 billion rands billed on to buy diesel. In the 254 billion rand fiscal relief provided by National Treasury, there's about 22 billion rands of set aside for diesel. So in total, we're talking about 30 billion rands. So I think the cost of protecting the South African economy will be significant, but we think that the measure of the success of our intervention should be seen relative to the degree to which we are able to protect jobs, ensure that there's some degree of GDP growth so that we don't collapse the economy. And I think that's what we are trying to do now. And then the third area in relation to immediate intervention is to scale up our work on demand side management. So we know that there's significant potential there, especially at the household level. ESCOM ran a very successful campaign in 2010. They were able to save about 3,000 megawatts. So in the current parlance, that will be 3 stages of load shedding. We think that that's still possible. Now with the maturity of technology, we are able to roll out rapidly. I mean, as I speak to you now, I'm at the Isuzu plant here in Gqeberha, working with the management to see how best we can be able to ameliorate the experiences from the adverse impact of load shedding. Yesterday we were at Mercedes-Benz. This morning we started at VW, the major employers, primary contributors to the South African economy. But the point I want to make is the following, that here we're also with the municipality of Nelson Mandela Bay. They were able to illustrate that with the introduction of demand side intervention, switching off the geysers, they were able to save about 30 megawatts. So you can imagine if they were to expand to penetrate other areas of Gqeberha and were able to do it on a national scale, those are immediate benefits. And if you come to think of it, the contribution of consumption of the households in Gqeberha is insignificant compared to the proportion of consumption of the households in our major metropolitan centers of Tshwane, Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, Cape Town, and eThekwini. So that's the point that we're making. So working with National Treasury, NECOM will be making proposals on how we can help to ensure that we introduce facilities to help us to ramp up. Of course, you'll not be able to install 8 million of these things. I mean, if you look at the conservative, we've got about 8 million geysers. We are not suggesting you'll achieve that now through this window of 150 days of winter, but it's going to be an ongoing program rollout to make sure that we're able to achieve. And then the other thing, just more on the long term, of course, not just long term, but also immediate resource mobilization fund, working with the private sector. We are getting the necessary expertise. They will be embedded with Becky there. Becky will determine, working with Rudy at NECOM, ourselves, to see which power stations can we deploy these experts to help us to resolve this problem. I think there is nothing that can replace experience, expertise, people who have done it before, and Beck is very receptive to that, and we're working exceptionally well to achieve that. And then there are issues on accelerating the procurement of new generation capacity, like I said, wind, solar, gas, and battery storage. And work is at that advanced stage to procure emergency power solutions for a period not more than 5 years. It's important not more than 5 years because it's emergency, and it will be at tariffs that are not alarmist, and that helps us to resolve this program so that we are able to address load shedding. ESCOM is working tirelessly. I think there's an opportunity that presents itself for us to get an additional 1,000 megawatts. I think from Mozambique, they are still pursuing that through a power purchase agreement. So these are the short-term interventions to help us with the relief in the immediate. We will be working at Newcom and our colleagues at ESCOM to improve and strengthen grid capacity. I think it's another area of risk that present significant opportunities for failure of the grid. So it's important that we are able to pay attention to that, so that when we roll out this new generation capacity, we are able to evacuate the grid. We are going to introduce the principle now, you must use it or lose it. So there are other private sector developers who have got grid access. They've taken an inordinate amount of time to access that, to construct this project and evacuate the electrons. And yet on the queue, there are good quality projects that are financed, they've got PPAs, and yet they are waiting on the queue to get grid access. So we'll be placing conditionalities. If you don't exercise that right to access the grid, it's not yours permanently, because that comes at great cost to the South African economy. So we're going to make sure that those that are ready, prepared, and are able to unleash these electrons on the grid, they get that opportunity. So I thought that in a nutshell, Michael, I must just share with our media colleagues around the actions that we're doing. Just to emphasize, now we are in the Eastern Cape working with the automotive sector that contributes about 4.9% to South Africa's GDP, the major employer and anchor of the economy of the Eastern Cape. We are working with them on the winter plan intervention so that production continues. And we'll be doing the ones Toyota in KZN and the ones in Gauteng. We are confident about some degree of relief, but we are confident that beyond the winter period, we'll see that the intervention more enduring, more sustainable, and ultimately we should be able to address load shedding. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you very kindly, Minister. Very helpful and very nice broad strokes. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Sis Peliswe if she'll just pick up the short slide of Becky, and I'd like Becky to tell us a little bit more. You heard Minister referring to the week we've had and the oscillations between 4 and 5. Let's give it over to Mr. Nxumalo and just give us a taste of that, please, Becky, so we get a sense of some of the detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you kindly, Michael. Good afternoon, honorable ministers and colleagues. Thank you, Minister, for that broad outline. Colleagues, I will just share with you in terms of some of the building blocks to deal with the current challenges that we are facing as ESCOM and mostly within the generation space. I think the plan for this year that has been approved now by also the shareholder and the board is really to try and get the EAF end of this financial year to 60%. We have ended the year at 56%, and the biggest hurdle for us on that was the failure of the units at Kusile that the minister has referred to. But we are working hard to return those units by the end of this year. That will give us that 2,100 megawatts back. So that is the biggest issue. And another thing that I would like to share this year as well, this winter, we're also going through this winter without a unit at Quebec, which is something that is first for us in generation. But it's also the commitment that we have to deal with the issues of long-term operation of Koeberg Power Station. So we've got about 3,000 megawatts that are currently off, which makes this winter extremely difficult to deal with. But we are working hard with all the support that we are getting from the ministers and also from all the other stakeholders that have been brought through NICOM. They are really assisting us to really try to minimize the impact here. I think this slide is not new to the public. It's something that we've been shared, part of the 6 stations that we are focusing on. I'm pleased to report that we are seeing some good improvement, especially at Majuba and Duva power stations. Kusile, we will only see the improvement towards the end of the year as well. And then Tutuga still continues to be part of the issues, but I must also report that as of the 1st of this month, I've appointed a very experienced power station manager in that power station. He's already started. I was there on Wednesday to introduce and have a good heart to make sure that we claw back some of the megawatts that we have there. Yeah, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next one, please, Billy. This is just a summary. I think key here is Busile units. The rest of the other units, like the Mata ones, those ones we will be bringing back this weekend. But the Busile is really what is hamstringing us here. And then we are also working very hard to bring 5 and 6 back on stream as well. So as Medu before, like the minister has, so I've got teams that is now working specifically on these units without focusing on production, and then also with the industry support. So there's some project managers that we are getting to support us just to make sure that everything is correctly stress tested to ensure that as we move towards the end of this financial year, we are in a much better position. So thanks. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, this is just an outlook to see the next period of winter is going to be extremely difficult with those 3 units off, but we are doing everything that is we can to try and minimize that. I think some of the units that have been coming back from outages, like Medupi 6, there is back, it's delivering actually almost 100% power. So we are quite pleased with the performance of that unit after these major outages. The 666 we just also returned this week, so there is some good recovery so that we minimize the impact during this winter month as well. So apart from that, I think the minister has outlined all the plans, but we are focusing daily on reducing the unavailability of the fleet and to push to minimize the impact of load shedding, so that the current stage 4 to 6, we try and really every day to try and get it as low as possible so that it doesn't get worse than that. But we will only get a good reprieve once those Busile units are back and the Koeberg machine. But Koeberg is just going to be the substitute. As one comes up, the other one will go down because it's critical. And then I must also just lastly make a report that we are continuing with our philosophy maintenance. There, I think there's no scaling back on that one because that's what's going to give us the sustainability of what's happening within the fleet. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Michael.
Thank you very much, Beggy, and we wish you all the strength in this assignment. And obviously, it was a very quick synopsis, no need for specific detail today. Obviously, if individual members of the media have particular questions about plants or a particular place, you'll come with the questions. There, last but not least, let's have an opportunity to get input from Rudy. Just a broad stroke then about some of the deliverables and where we are on the overall EAP. Rudy, over to you, please.
Thank you, Michael. Afternoon, Minister, and thank you, Becky Kumalo. Minister has done a very eloquent, as always, set of introductory remarks. I have a couple of slides just to perhaps elucidate some of the points and to give an update in the way that we normally do from the National Energy Action National Energy Crisis Committee point of view. So I'll go quite quickly through it. I'm having problems with the screen. Okay, just give me a second. Colleagues and members from the media, what we have started doing is that there's always been questions asked. We've developed this plan. A lot of the work that the minister has spoken to, including the work that he's been doing specifically on trying to get a good handle of us understanding what's happening at power stations. We have now in the last few months developed key performance indicators, and the key performance indicators are largely to track and to understand whether what we are doing is providing an impact on the changes in that. And there are 3 quick performance indicators, and we think that's important. Firstly, what we have done is to notice that when there is weekend load shedding, right, there's quite a bit of high levels of load shedding for the rest of the week. So what we've done is to look at the 3-month moving average of weekend load shedding. And if weekend load shedding is low, what we do see is that the ability of supply becomes much better during the week. And of course, similarly, when it's not high, when it's high levels of weekend load shedding, we see a relatively poor state of supply during the course of the week. This just gives a quick paints a quick picture and comparatively does this so between the different years. As you can see, one compares to 21, 22, and 2022. Sorry, 20, 21, 2020, 23. You look at the top part of the orange graph, you can see that we've had quite significantly amounts of weekend load shedding. Dipped quite slightly during the parts of February to March, and then slightly seen an uptick between March and April. Some of that data will, of course, come through from April as May, as that has been quite significant. It's an important indicator, and it does help us to be able to track to see what we are doing around addressing load shedding. The second one, which is a common one, which generally used, is the operating reserve margin. Generally speaking, Eskom used to have reserve, and reserve margin is really the buffer, right? The amount of buffer of megawatts available in case of either partial unplanned load losses and a whole set of different factors that may put a significant stress on the grid. Reserve margins are important so that in unforeseen circumstances, you're able to play around with that buffer and utilize that when there's peaks in demand that does happen. But Eskom used to have a relatively high reserve margin of about 15 to 17%. Generally, international norm is a 10% reserve margin. What you see an inverse relationship here between, as you see, blue line is the operating reserve margin, and when it goes below that reserve margin, what you see is higher stages of load shedding. Similarly, when you see the reserve margin above 10%, you see the significant decline in the load shedding schedules, and that's quite important. So a higher reserve margin and maintaining that higher reserve margin allows for that buffer and reduces the levels of load shedding. And this is another interesting one that media colleagues have always asked. How are you tracking the additional megawatts that we're adding? And so you see on the right-hand side below there, it's all the, the additional megawatts in different forms, from demand management right down to prompt performance. We are tracking that on a yearly basis. This is, of course, projected megawatts. What we want to do is provide you the actual megawatts so that we're able to see whether we're seeing that impact. Key performance indicators are important for us to go forward. Again, as always, we have the dashboard that we track, and you recall the color coding. Not commenced is the gray, on track. Chevron green is delays but no intervention required. Off track, intervention needed, and then red, of course, critical challenges. So what you have seen utilizing the actions that we do track between what we saw the last time that we reported from now is that 25 actions on track. So that's quite, higher than what it was on the last side, which was 23. You see 10 actions delayed off track, but their work underway. So we're slightly behind schedule, but doesn't require an intervention. And then, of course, an update is, of course, 12 actions off track and require intervention. So a slight uptick from the 9 actions reported last time. And of course, inversely, what we see is 1 actions facing critical challenges versus 4 actions that have faced critical challenges. That 1 action is, of course, related to the energy availability factor of a target of 75%. And that, of course, is something that the minister has been trying to address, and how we try and deal with it in the short term versus what we see 3 or 4 years from now. There's, of course, a detailed a level of reporting on each and every one of them. I'm not going to go through all of this because this has been covered by the minister, of course, but just to say, since the last time, there are about 7 areas of key interventions that have happened. The consortium of experts have been appointed by the National Treasury in terms of the review. Minister had given you that particular important exercise, and this exercise is to determine and to do a diagnostic of all Eskom's coal-powered fire stations. And this is quite critical for us, and should be reported to NECOM by July. Of course, Minister is quite actively involved in ensuring that that technical expertise is moved along. We've also had the public, the publishing of the net billing framework, which outlines the proposed tariff for methodology and export credits for net billing. And this is quite important to accelerate small-scale embedded generation and a whole set of incentives that are there. NERSA has published that. Minister has indicated the additional work from the Southern African region, both from the power pool and from Kohorabasa. This is quite important, and I want to cover that. We've also had the notice that has been gazetted to exclude solar PV and battery storage facilities from EIAs in low and medium environmental sensitivity. Recall, we've raised this, and the Department of Environmental Affairs, of course, published and gazetted this particular section that will significantly reduce timeframes, but not impact on the environment, given where this sets of investments are going to take place. Minister had also indicated on the 24th of April, we had a demand management in Daba, and this is where Eskom had launched its distribution demand management program. Part of this is what Minister had referred to, quite significant performance contracts will be introduced to incentivize a whole set of different users, energy intensive users, mid-merit customers, households. We will be looking at launching this with Minister and President as part of the winter campaign. And then, of course, additional work streams have been established, one to look at distribution and transmission. Transmission in particular, as the Minister had said, the grid constraint environment, and in particular what the GE for transmission, Segamotsa, is working with his team quite hard at looking at expediting a number of projects, given that you still have to implement the transmission development plan. There are plans to look at 25 priority projects that could add over 12,000 megawatts of new capacity to the transmission network. The team is working pretty hard to be able to ensure that we do get those megawatts on the grid and they can be dispatched across the network, and of course we are able to see that benefit going forward. When Minister had spoken about the private sector embedded generation projects, this was just, we tracked from our side, as Minister said, about 10 gigawatts of private sector embedded generations, and we just show from a data point of view what NERSA looks at in terms of registration. And registration is generally the last phase of a project before they get to financial close, and that's quite important. And as you can see, you see some significant and exponential growth in the first quarter of this year, very flat in the previous 2 years. And then, of course, as we introduce that Schedule 2 change, you see in quarter 2, 2022, 446 registered number of megawatts, and so it has. And then, of course, what you do see is quite significant, under 2,500 megawatts that have just been registered in the first quarter of this year. And that's quite significant. So you see private sector taking up that regulatory change, and that's quite important. But it is tied in, as Minister, and as we say, it's tied in to ensure that we do introduce those particular specialized projects on getting that additional grid capacity. We can evacuate those electrons, and we can get additional megawatts onto the grid as quickly as possible. What are the priorities for the rest of the few months? Hybrid projects have to find financial close as a matter of urgency, and that's going to be quite critical. The additional just under 3 megawatts of the standard offer has to be concluded, and this includes the contracting from Calvo Power Station, for instance. The launch of the winter campaign, that's going to be quite critical for us. As you can see, residential households consume 25% of electricity and contribute 35% of peak demand. Data shows that if you simply switch off electric geysers during peak, we can save up to 1 stage of load shedding, right? So this is quite important, and the Minister Ramokgopa's emphasis, as he always says, is that these are quick wins, is a no-brainer. We need to get demand-side management and energy-saving interventions working as quickly. Minister had spoken about the maximization of the OCTTs and his visit to eNCA. We need to expand the storage capacity and deal with some of the constraints that are there. You've already spoken about what we need to do around Unit 4 and bringing that back. He's already spoken about the importance of getting financial close. The remaining projects are going to be important because, again, if we can fast track and get them into construction, it's quite important for us to get those megawatts again onto the grid as quickly as possible. And then some long-term interventions around the transmission company that it's spoken to. More importantly, as we've reported previously, the establishment of the energy one-stop shop is quite critical. This will be housed, as we said previously, at the DTIC. We have slightly pushed out the launch date to the end of the 30th of May. I've asked colleagues there to ensure that it does happen. This is important for us to try and deal with permitting and authorizations, streamlining it, reducing the red tape so that we can get approval for whether they are public procurement projects or whether they embedded generation private sector projects. We need to get approvals done, streamlining it and get it done as quickly as possible. Once that is done, that reduces significantly the time for financial close, for constructions and COD for these particular projects. And then, of course, what we have done is working through an energy security bill. This is what we refer to as the omnibus bill, to again smooth out and try and deal with some of the regulatory aspects that, as Minister says, is that can help us to be able to ensure that we do support Eskom's generation recovery plan and get the energy availability factor up, but more importantly, to get additional megawatts on the grid. This is just what Minister had spoken to, some of the areas that Becky had also spoken to about ensuring that we reduce our peak, reduce the capacity loss factor. Planned capacity loss factor during winter peak is just data, and I think it's quite important to see what we're trying to do, and Becky, as you've seen, has looked at that. Secondly, just some of the predictions around the generation recovery plan and what the estimated EAF for each and every one of the specific sets of units, coal, peaking, and Kuberg, and that's quite important because that helps to be able to reduce load loss factors that critically may take us into high levels of load shedding. In the last two slides, it's just, I think, quite importantly what the Minister have always communicated over the last couple of weeks, that, of course, there is this whole question of debate on whether one looks at decommissioning of power stations, and the decommissioning schedule are, of course, existing, contained in the IRP 2019. What the Minister has embarked on as part of the National Treasury progress in doing that diagnostic assessments is to look at how we will have to revise that decommissioning schedule on the basis of us requiring immediately energy and being able to ensure where there are plants that can continue operating and has relatively high EAF, that we potentially look at that. But that's conditional on a few things. Of course, the technical assessment that we talked about from National Treasury, modeling exercise that the Minister will drive and politically drive, bringing in the PCC, the colleagues from environmental, the colleagues from the Just Energy Transition Unit, and then, of course, looking at the impact of the carbon trajectory. So this exercise is expected to be completed in 2023. And so, of course, as a measure right now, government has taken the decision that no new schedules for decommissioning will happen until this work. So this is quite important going forward. And then again, this the last slide is just some of the detailed update that the Minister had spoken about relating to those three areas of releasing further bid readers, procuring emergency power, and the cross-border from that. And that's always contained in the updates. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Minister. I must appreciate the Minister's strong and important leadership he's provided. He's hit the ground running. He's provided strong political leadership, supported the team that I run, the technical team at NECOM, the secretariat, and has provided absolutely brilliant guidance, being able to understand the challenges and the dynamic that's there, and being able to drive and take forward the vigor of trying to implement with the team the implementation of the Energy Action Plan announced by the President in July 2022. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudy. Much appreciated. Right, members of the media, there's a significant range of questions. Perhaps what I should have done up front, I don't know if my camera's gone off, but anyway, I'm here. Just to indicate it's a media briefing, so it's not an Imbizo. So on this platform, we are biased to our media colleagues. I see there's some other colleagues that have posed questions here, which I'm not sure which house they're from. But please, it also is helpful for future, and I should have said it earlier, which some of you have done, just state your media house in your question. There are already some questions that are addressed in the presentations. I will share them in case the presenters want to just give a word. So, for example, things about the cross-border procurement and battery storage, etc. But here we go. And then please, colleagues, I just indicate that I'm battling to see hands. I can only see Aviwa's hand, and I certainly can't give only one colleague an opportunity to choose. There's some problem with me seeing all the hands. So I'm going to start with the questions. And Minister, with your permission, I'll just try and indicate where they are posted. And then we'll have a look while we respond. Well, by the end, I'll look if I can give only a few voices. So there's a Helmo Preuss, unknown media house. Any news on the IRP 2023? Perhaps, Rudy, that's in your area. He also wants to know about the battery storage, Helmo. If you want them to respond on that, you can. But it was raised, and does the battery storage include Eskom pump storage? And then Helmo also wants to know about small and medium enterprises. Are they able to use the bounce back scheme to pay for solar PV? Rudy, that's your one. It's been raised a number of times. And finally, he wants to know, will there be a nationally determined wheeling charge for both Eskom and local government transmission networks? Then Teresa Smith is saying, with Komati Power Station decommissioned, what is the timeline for the others? Now, Teresa, there was a slide on that, but if the minister may want to comment on that, he may. Then Paul van Meulen, I don't think you're a journalist, but his question is about, Rudy, if you'd be kind enough to read that while I take the others. It's an interesting point about the feed-in tariff from the flat roof facilities of municipalities, and you'll just read that, Rudy, if you can perhaps give the colleague there some guidance.
Yes,
and then Teresa's also asking, did Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment give Eskom the approval to operate the temporary flue stacks? Eskom gave the exemption to make the application, but has it been approved? To the best of my knowledge, it was approved, but Beggy can field that one. And the issue of diesel storage from Helmer, remember we've been discussing the issue of diesel storage for the open gas terminals. How much space do we have? Is there any work on the capacity increase on that? Helmer, I don't know how quickly in the last 2 weeks we could have changed that, but perhaps Becky will tell us about that. Gentlemen, Aviva from eNCA is a minister. It's a question about timelines. Aviva's raised that we have timelines set in July last year. During the State of the Nation address, the President spoke about the 9-point plan. Can the minister commit to some timelines on when we can really expect a reduction of load shedding? Helmer, you'll see there was a slide. You've got lots of questions, Helmer. Perhaps we'll just type here, which is your media house, so that I know. The update on power from cross-border, Botswana, Mozambique, Zambia, the megawatts. Rudy did have a slide on that, but he might want to reinforce that. Dick Verlaine says that he's happy that we're addressing the grid access issue and that there are many wind and solar projects that are ready to commence construction, but the car powership RMIPP projects are still blocking 800 megawatts while they have no environmental approval and might never have that. What are we doing to unlock that 800 megawatts? So perhaps, Minister, that might be something you'd want to reflect on, because it is also about those immediate interventions. Well, Aviwa, there was a slide there that Beggy spoke. I don't think we're going to go into too much detail. Aviwa, Beggy was asking about what can we expect over the winter season. We're not there yet, Aviwa, to give granular details, but you saw Beggy had looked at some projections there in the meantime, but if Beggy wants to comment on that, he should. Julia Evans asks that the mega bid window, 15,000 megawatts, will it be staggered over time to ensure competitive pressure? Can we give more information about how this will be structured? So I don't know, perhaps Rudy and the minister, that might be something that you and the other minister have looked into. And then I'll leave this to the colleagues Bheki and Rudy to decide where we are on our process. But Amanda Watson, we've met Amanda before in this meeting. She said that if possible, can we drop the presentations in the WhatsApp group? So you can decide, colleagues, if they are there. Kopano Gumbi from Reuters. Thank you, Mr. Gumbi. To Mr. Ntomalo, please can you outline, Bheki, the load shedding outlook? Again, it's the winter season and the scenarios constant 6 or higher. So Kopano, I'm going to say that Bheki might touch on that, but we're not going to go in great detail because we are still working on a bit of that stuff. Carol Payton, News 24, and Carol, I also could see your hand with our viewers and nobody else's. Could the minister please expand on the options about the emergency procurement? Is this 1,000 megawatts from Mozambique from a power ship? If not, is this a possible remedy that regulatory problems in South Africa? So Carol's saying that maybe we can park a power ship somewhere else. Is that an option? So basically we're trying to get to what are the immediate options. And her second question is on the extension of the life of coal power stations. What extent do you think regulations around minimum emissions will be a stumbling block? Now, Carol, I know the minister will be able to speak very candidly on that because he's very clear on that one. Deneen Erasmus from Business Day. Minister, this is for yourself. You previously said government was considering introducing a blended finance scheme to support poor households to access rooftop solar. Now you're saying Treasury is looking at a loan guarantee scheme for SMMEs. Are both of these funding interventions being considered? And by when do we think the support will become available? So I think perhaps, Minister, and also for Rudy, one of the themes that we have been alerted to by the media and other stakeholders is the matter of, it's okay that we have all these things, but how do poor households also get protected in this whole national effort? The minister speaks about us all as a nation being invested. So we can't have solutions that are detrimental to the poor households in South Africa. Carol then also asks, given that South Africa's coal-powered power stations are producing less than 50% EAF, and Bheki, you're welcome to confirm that, do you consider it quite likely that the NDCs can be met without shutting down any power stations by 2030 and beyond? Johannes from My Broadband. Thank you very much. And he wants to know, what does a negative reserve margin mean practically? And Jan, I'm not going to try that one myself. I'm not entirely clear on that myself. Then here we have our viewer again from eNCA. Can the minister please give clarity on the 14,771 megawatts of new generation that you mentioned coming on from renewable? Is it still coming? What are the timelines around that? Bheki, Deneen Erasmus, Business Day, is asking, your presentation says Eskom's generation recovery plan is geared towards the EAF of 60% by 2024 and 65 by 25. Eskom Chair Mpo Makwana is on record as saying 65 by 2024, 70 by 2025. Have we changed these? And she also wants to know what average load factor are we anticipating in the open gas turbines in June, July, August? So again, Deneen, we might not have exact detail on that, but I'll let the colleagues decide. We will obviously, in due course, come back with one of the weekly briefings that will go more directly into our winter preparedness. And then Deneen's other question, for the Minister, the 3 immediate and short-term interventions mentioned, improving EAF, making more use of open gas, and demand-side management, what impact do you expect these interventions to have over the next 150 days in terms of additional megawatts available? Very interesting question. I'm sure, Deneen, because many South Africans are, as the minister said, worried about the move from 4, 5, 6. And then Mr. Devet Taliat, to you, Rudy. KPI number 3, the projected megawatts added to the grid per year slide. Could you, Mr. Dix, elaborate on the inputs influencing your projections? Embedded generation tapers off after 2024. while SSEG stagnates from the 2023 onwards. So it's that whole mix, Rudy, of trade-offs and bringing on, bringing off. And then Julia Evans from Daily Maverick, will the 15,000 megawatt bid window be staggered over time? It's the same question we had before. I don't know exactly that staggering question, if the minister would feel that one, Minister Sputler, or if Rudy would. Obviously, Minister, you will be given the opportunity to start. And then we have Terence Creamer from Engineering News. Eskom is projecting a steep fall in unplanned outages for winter to below 15 gigawatts. Is it realistic, Bheki, given the performance above 19 gigawatts recently? What level of load shedding will there be if we meet it? And then I don't really want to take anonymous attendees, because these are public media briefings, so I'm not going to entertain these two questions unless you're prepared to disclose your name. Legal obligation on the Paris Agreement, I think it was very clearly stated on the slide there by Rudy, that you have the answer to that, and so you're most welcome to read that again. Etienne Rubers, have new pumped storage facilities been included in the Energy Action Plan? Interesting, it's a new one. Bheki, this might be yours. South Africa needs to start constructing them now, because we will need them in the long term for the RE penetration. Very interesting one, that one, Etienne Ribas. Now, I'm not going to take the anonymous person who's asking about all the climate change things, because I think we're clear on that, but the minister may want to reflect on that. And the question from Renew E, that's who Etienne is. And there's somebody who's made, who's Luke, who's done a very obscene comment, which I don't think I'm going to entertain, Luke. Don't join our media briefing for that. And then Manji Morgan, there are very few projects connected via wheeling. So just perhaps even from Rudy's side, this whole matter of wheeling, which has been raised prior, what is our current position on this? And then let me have a quick look. And just so that we're not entirely voiceless, Peliswa, can you allow Aviwe and Carol, which are the only two hands I can see, and media, please, if you'll just indulge me that I really can only see these two. Can we just allow Carol? And Carol, please, you've had a number of questions, and Aviwe, so I'm not going to give you a huge amount of airtime, but we do want to hear a voice or two. Let's just hear from Carol and Aviwe, and then if there's anything I've missed out, others can pop it in the chat. Carol or Aviwe, are you available? Carol?
Yes. Thanks so much,
Please, Carol.
Michael. Thank you, Michael. I'm not sure if you can you hear me? Yes.
Hear you perfectly, Carol. Please proceed.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Look, you've actually ran through all my questions, so I don't really need any more to ask.
Lovely.
Thanks very much.
That's the way I like it. Aviwe, are you covered? Let's hear your voice.
Thank you. Yes, maybe just to emphasize just those timelines. We need to know how soon we'll see the end of load shedding, given that we've heard these plans before, energy available, just that clarity on when we can expect the end of load shedding. And the winter plan, 3 units were mentioned that were out. How bad is it going to be over the winter?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much for that, Aviwe. And please, colleagues, if time allows, we'll take another round, but please pop it in there. And as for Luke, I don't know, can we just remove Luke, whoever Luke is, from this meeting, please? Right, Minister Ramokgopa, I'd like to give you the opportunity to kick off first, Minister, and there's some really interesting questions and comments in building that national interest that you spoke about from our colleagues in the media. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Michael, for facilitating the Q&A, and just to thank the colleagues from the media houses for the great questions that you are asking. And I'm going to answer a few and leave the rest to my colleagues. So the issues around battery storage, whether it refers to the Eskom pump storage, no, those are two different technologies. Battery storage is a form of technology. Pump storage is a form of technology. Really, pump storage is about two reservoirs. The one is elevated, the one is at the bottom. And during the night, when we draw energy from renewables or where there's a very little demand, we were able to pump the water up. And then during peak, when we need that the energy, then we release the water to go to the lower dam or reservoir, and in the course of doing that, it runs a turbine and then generates energy. And then the batteries, by definition, you charge them using battery storage, using PV during periods of access, and then during the peak, which is essentially in the evening and the morning when you don't have the benefit of the sun, then you draw your energy from the battery. So those are two different energy sources or technologies rather. So it doesn't refer battery, it doesn't refer to ESCOM pump storage. And then yes, there's a question related to that. I think you are absolutely correct. I'm sorry, I missed the name on the need for us to construct a pump storage. I know that there's a pump storage facility that can be built in the area of Dubat. All the licensing has been done. And it's absolutely right, the person who asked the question, there's long lead times for the construction of pump storage. I mean, it takes you approximately anything between 5 and 8 years to do that, the construction of pump storage. But the unit cost of megawatt production is about 30 million compared to battery, which is 50 million. Battery gives you a life, of course, with the existing technology, I anticipate that to improve going into the future. A life of about 20 years, whilst pump storage can give you up to 70 years. So that's the kind of considerations and configurations that must be factored into decision making. And then the overwhelming question that is coming through also is around the wheeling framework. I absolutely agree. One of the things that is receiving attention now is to ensure that there's a nationally determined wheeling framework, if you like, so that there's a consistent application of the charge. And as some of the people have observed, I think if we resolve that question, we are likely going to release a significant amount of megawatts into the system. So we, as the ministry, we working with the ESCOM and municipalities, we be meeting SALGA with the sole purpose of resolving, amongst others, the issues of wheeling, so that we're able to get the benefit of evacuating the electrons. And then on the issue of the flue stacks, yes, Minister Chris has granted that dispensation and exemption, which allows ESCOM to continue with a temporary arrangement so that we are able to commission those units. And it's on the basis of that approval that we are able to have a timeline of getting the 3 units back on stream by the 24th of December. The last of the 3, the first one will come into place early December, and the last one will come early November, I'm sorry, and then the last one will come about the 24th of December, and that's the 2,100 megawatts that we referred to. On the issue of diesel, I know, I mean, the capacity anchor left the 40 million liters off-site of diesel capacity, storage capacity, and 17 million liters on-site. And of course, the one at Khorikwa is being piped through, is being brought on through a pipe, so there will not be major storage issues. Of course, the one at Ankerlech, the one limiting factor is logistics to get the trucks to site. And when we are talking to the station manager, they can accommodate a maximum of 100 trucks a day. So logistics is a significant constraint there. And yes, I mean, 2016, 18 to 16, these units were on load about 21% of the time. And as I speak to you, I mean, they are on load on average 11.5% of the time. So there's scope for us to improve that. Of course, we have to address the issues of funding, and I did speak to the kind of funding that is available. And then on the mega bid window, yes. So all we are saying is that you are introducing certainty to the market, or if you like, a rolling bid window. But I do agree with the question that there has to be a competitive pressure, so that it's not just open-ended. Although you have a commitment of a mega bid window, but you can still shape it in a manner that you release it through chunks to ensure that there's competitive bidding. So you're absolutely correct. I think it's something that we are applying our minds to, of course, working with the Minister Mantashe and Rudy so that we don't undermine the competitive bidding principle. So I agree with you. You are absolutely correct. I think this one is from Carol, if I'm not mistaken. So the point we're making on the rescheduling of delayed the decommissioning of these power plants. So we had made the case that as we speak now, there's about 3 units at Camden that are meant to go out. If you look at them, they give us 140 megawatt each. So that gives you 420 megawatts that is online to be decommissioned now. And of course, as we speak now, we are short of megawatts. And if you look at Camden, it's consistently within the top 5 performing power stations, referring to those units. So I don't think that it helps us to decommission those that are performing. So what we are saying is that delayed decommissioning. We're doing modeling on what are these impact emissions. We also do modeling on what are those cost implications, and then it will have an impact on you extend their life by what period. But what needs to be emphasized is the following, and I want to be unequivocal about this, is that we will not deviate from our nationally determined contributions, our decarbonization agenda, the net zero path by 2050. I think the revisions is within those timelines. I think it's important that I underscore that, so that when we have this conversation, it's not a binary one. It's not about a deviation from that which we have committed to. I think it's important that we are able to communicate that message. And in fact, we have met with our IPG partners. The IPG is a group of Western countries that had made facilities available through the JET IP program to clarify that position. Myself, Minister Godan, Minister Chris, we had very open, frank discussion. And there's an appreciation from the partners that South Africa needs to have the lights on. And I think the emphasis there was, as we decarbonize within an environment where the lights are on. I also had a follow-up discussion with the German envoy, Mr. Bach, of course, interested German envoy on JET IP in Cape Town early this week, and we repeated the same message, had a long, honest conversation, and I think they also offering technical support to work with us, and there's a great level of appreciation of the situation that is facing South Africa. On the question around the blended financing facility for poor household and the loan scheme for SMMEs, now those are 2 different instruments. So both these instruments seek to do the following. First is that SMMEs are one of the biggest employers in the country, but they are the biggest casualty of load shedding because they are not sitting with the necessary capital to make the upfront investment. So we need to introduce a facility to make it possible for them to continue to operate. So there's a scheme that existed before, and we want to use, if you like, that scheme that proved to be very successful to make sure that we give effect to this. On the household side is that those that they can afford, they've got the right risk profile to raise money through the commercial banks, have got unencumbered cash, they're able to roll that out. But poor households are likely going to be left at the margins. So we are exploring that possibility of a financing facility for the households. Remember that the requirement is that you need to, for you to benefit from the incentive, you must have rolled out or installed the solar PV. Many households can afford to do that, and that's why that facility is important. We are raising this also in the context of the experiences of Vietnam, having rolled out the very solar PV, exactly the same program as we are envisaging, and provided for an incentive through the feed-in tariff. They were able to generate an additional 9,000 megawatts over a period of 12 months. And in the next few weeks, we'll be studying that intensely, meeting with the Vietnamese, including the possibility of going there just to understand how the scheme works so that we learn and unlearn from their mistakes and also successes, so that we don't repeat the mistake but consolidate on their successes of course, we are going to localize that, domesticate their experience so that it takes into account the South African conditions, and we're able to accelerate. So the point we're making is that someone has done it before, a developing country. I think that we've got a case to also do it, and that's why we'll be pursuing that, and we'll make those results known. And then on the issues of interventions, so the three interventions. So I said the first one is on demand side. I just stated to you what is the potential on demand side. Remember, demand side intervention, especially on solar, on the geysers, household or pumps, if we were to put the devices on your DB box and we're able to have access to all of your appliances. So it relies on the willingness of households to participate. So I can tell you what the potential is, but what the offtake will be is a different conversation. And that's why you're not able to say in exact terms what are those megawatts. But I'm saying to you that the potential could be up to 4,000 megawatts. Here in Gqeberha, with the little interventions they've made, they are saving 30 megawatts. So we can see it's possible, it's happening as we speak. So it's about the aggressiveness of the rollout, the appetite of households to participate. Essentially is a behavioral change, and is going to rely on the South African public households to take on board this solution. And then the other one on the energy availability factor, Becky makes the point that, of course, the intention is to achieve that 65% by next year, I think, if I remember the figures very well. The relationship really is that a 1 percentage point improvement in your energy availability factor is almost equivalent to anything between 450 to 500 megawatts. So if you were to improve by 5 percentage points, you are adding 2,500 megawatts. So you are asking how many are we anticipating? Of course, that the target is stretched over a calendar year, and that's why we're saying we'll do those computations and come back to you and say this is what is possible. So yes, you are absolutely correct. I think what is going to be different as we come to give you this update is to be very explicit and intentional about the targets in both megawatt terms and also the timelines. Like I said, it's something that we are working on it so that we're able to reduce that in megawatt terms, and in that way we're able to say these are the X number of stages we're going to take out. And then on the 14,700 megawatt, I did say that we have gotten NERSA concurrence for me on the ministerial determination, so that's something that will be rolling out quickly to ensure that we were able to achieve the timelines. And Mike, I'm going to leave it there as indicated. Ahmed Isuzu here, so we're still finalizing our plans with the management of Isuzu. But my colleagues are here more than competent to conclude the questions.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Perfect, Minister. Thank you sincerely for outstanding set of information, and we wish you all the best that side, Minister. As we invite, let me invite Beggy next. Beggy, let's hear from you, sir, please.
Thank you, Michael. I think the Minister has covered most of the questions. Maybe just few that I just need to clarify. There was a question with regard to what I presented between 60 and 65 and what the chairman presented. It's 65 and 70. I think there is no difference in that. Let me just explain what I've used. I presented the average for the year. What the chairman shared was that by end of this financial year, we will be at 65. That is the number at March. But the average for the year is going to be 60. So that's the difference. So as the following year, which is 2025. That is the only difference that between the two, but there is no contradiction between the two statements. I think there was also, the Minister have covered adequately the issue of the storage capacity, especially at Ankara. So the only thing I can touch on, there was a question with regards to the 3 months in winter, which is June, July, August, to say what will be the load factor for our OCGTs. We are looking at about 20%, but currently we are at about 11%, which is the average for the year as well. But that's the numbers. I think the last question I would want to touch on what was raised by Terence in terms of the gigawatts of 19%, while we're talking about 15,000 and less. Yes, you're right, Terence, but we are talking about the monthly average, and then those spikes that goes up to 19, those becomes like daily or future. That's when we will be also using a lot of diesels. But in the issue of winter, Michael, maybe just let me say that we are still going to come back to the public with the winter plan. Is still going through the internal processes, but like I've indicated, it's going to be very difficult winter with all those 3 units at Kusile and Kubek off. So it's going to be a very tough winter, but we will come back with that comprehensive plan once we have gone through the internal approvals. Yeah, not to repeat what the Honourable Minister have said, I think those are the only one I could pick up that I needed me to touch on. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Becky. Now, colleagues, as I invite Rudy to come and do the sweep, if any of you have a last one that you want to type in the Q&A, please do it, but I'm not going to take a lot because it's quite a time. But as Rudy comes on, colleagues, I really want to make this appeal to members of the media. I mean, obviously, I do understand that, you know, the kinds of reportage and the angles you focus on, but we have done the assessment that if you, I mean, the way you did it with COVID, the way you helped with the promotion of non-pharmaceutical behaviors, the way you assisted in helping clarify when there was a lot of contestation around vaccination, that kind of partnership with our South African media. And by the way, I'm sure we're all proud to see, was it Reporters Without Borders giving us quite a good pat, 10 points up yesterday on the index, and also finding ourselves in that 30% where we have a much better scorecard between ourselves as government and the media. So we are happy with that. Obviously, we can do more, but in that national interest to the media, I really would like to appeal to yourselves for that partnership, whether it's some sort of curated TV show everywhere, or in the print media, maybe we could run some discussions. Radio guys, maybe we can get young people talking about their experiences. But if we can really tighten the demand, it's going to give us a huge opportunity to make this winter less traumatic for all of us. So it's just my appeal. Mr. Baloy, as you know, and Peliswe here from Chisas Media are our point people for yourselves. I'd be very grateful for any suggestions from leadership in the media as to how we can push. We do have content, we've got tips, but at the same time, I think more curated conversations around demand management can help us go further. So without further ado, can I invite Rudy to wrap up those areas of some of the technical elements of the action plan.
Quick, Michael, and thanks to the Minister. Can you hear me? Sorry, I had to switch device. Thank you. I had to switch device because of I have an additional schedule of load shedding, unfortunately. Quickly, RP 2023, I have no firm commitments yet from DMRE, although we've been engaging on some of the criteria and some of the areas of what needs to go into those factors and variables that need to be considered. We'll provide you an update in the next the next comms meeting on when is expected to release the updated IRP. The feed-in tariff debate, I think it's quite important. As the Minister said, NECOM was looking at 2 things. Well, we've done 3 things to try and deal with aspects around, the feed-in, wheeling, and net billing. They're all kind of in the same sense, are complex sets of policy documents and provide important guidance for both municipalities, for distributors, right? So there is work currently being done. Specifically, as I've said, the net billing framework is already published by NERSA for further comments. NECOM is doing work on the feed-in tariff, and I agree with, I think it's Paul from Merlin that talks about that. I mean, the potential, and if it's incentivized correctly, the potential to be able to get significant number of people to dispatch using, a feed-in methodology has a potential for quickly doing that. Again, there are processes to be able to do that. Ministers has responded to the wheeling framework. So I do think that's very important. So, keep your, eyes open. We will be publishing and hopefully getting out comments on a policy frame for that. I've already responded to the South African power pool. You can see we've now concluded an additional 400 megawatts from from Mars on the Gorabasa. That brings it up to just over 1,400 megawatts through the power. Not only, so remember, there's the Southern African power pool where everybody puts their surplus power in, and that's utilized, and there are contracting arrangements. And then there are, of course, Southern African bilateral arrangements that ESCOM negotiates around accessing power in the sub-region. And those are the additional areas that we're able to get at. So of course ESCOM had concluded the PPA with Mars on the Gorabasa for the additional 400 megawatts. That's quite critical for them. Carol, you make a really good observation, right? I mean, low EAF means relatively low load factor, right? Which means that carbon emissions are relatively low. I know that some of the PCC chaps have been doing some modeling, and with high levels of load shedding and increasing plant, decreasing plant performance, that in actual fact, if one keeps the trajectory the way it is, we will probably be in our NDC range and significantly contribute to that. But of course, that doesn't help us because, I mean, while you may from an environmental point of view and from our commitments to the UNFCCC around our NDC, meet those targets, we don't have energy supply, so the cost to the economy is much more higher. And of course, what we need to do is get additional renewables, new megawatts onto the grid, and of course, ensure that we deal with some of the poor plant performance as we go along. And of course, the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan talks about a whole set of transition arrangements and support for both new electric vehicles or new energy vehicles, as we refer to them, and green hydrogen are part of our decarbonization commitments going forward. What does a negative reserve margin mean? Practically, it means load shedding, right? And severe highs of load shedding. Reserve margins are important, and Becky probably is a better engineer to explain that. But it's partly just why you try and avoid, so if you have unplanned, either partial or full load losses, the reserve margin provides that buffer that doesn't have to, increases the level of load shedding, and therefore creates a significant strain on the system itself. That buffer is quite important, and having that kind of reserve margin also helps around a whole set of technical issues around balancing the grid, getting the frequencies adequate, and a whole set of other different things that could potentially put at risk. The KPI 3. So what we're doing with the tracking of the potential megawatts, right? So you have to break it down. We've done a bit of modeling of this, right? So we've done the modeling on the initial modeling we did for the embedded generation. Is that we're actually tracking actual projects, right? So we're tracking projects where we've been able to get a sense of project developers and the pipeline of projects that are there. We track the different stages of where they are at, and that's the 10 gigawatts that we track, the 104 that the minister referred to. We're able to know where they're at in every stage of the approval process. So are they still seeking EIA authorization? Are they at NERSA? Have they applied for either cost estimate letter, or they've already got a budget quote? Are they in the, they've completed financial close? So this is actual tracking, and generally you are right. I mean, what you do see is the leveling off and tapering down of that. And so, of course, again, we've done similar modeling work on the SSEG and particular things. If we introduce, for example, a feed-in tariff with the correct kind of incentive to be able to attract people to build PV and dispatch onto the grid. These are, again, estimates that we track, and of course, once you introduce the kind of regulatory framework, particularly if you introduce a net, let's just say a net value framework, maybe still a bit down the line from a feed-in tariff, what happens to that? And again, all those particular interventions around getting megawatts on the grid, you can track versus actual versus potential. And I think that's important for us to be able to do that. So both on SSEG and on private sector embedded generation, what you see is exactly that kind of U-shaped curve. We are still on an upward trajectory. We actually, in our modeling, the initial model showed us that we would get a peak of about 5 gigawatts. I mean, it's phenomenal right now. We're into 10 already, and we're still tracking additional more. You can look at any of the data points. You can look at the grid connection unit on their data points around budget quotes. Look at look at the exponential growth on nurse registrations and what we track. And I think that's really all of it, because I think everything else has been covered by Becky and the Minister. And thanks so much, Michael, again, for allowing me to make those particular comments. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. Much appreciated. And just two last ones for you, Beggy. It's the one we are aware of from Mariam Isa, sorry, Mariam. The issue of Kuberg's license, will it be renewed in time? Will the refurbishment will be completed by the time the license renewal process? You know that one. And then also Terence is asking finally that the plan for Eskom to procure 5 years of emergency power, when will the bidding be launched? And what are the technologies envisaged, and how much capacity will be procured? What is the CKW, Terence, I don't know what that means, CKWH cap. I presume my brother from Malo, the engineer, knows what that is. Carol had a follow-up, but I didn't see it typed as yet, and there's a Mokwena Kuluma in here fast. But Beggy, I'm going to ask you to field those last two, and then I'll draw us to a close. Before I do that, colleagues, I do want to also thank, we are emerging with a partnership, as we did have with the COVID, with the NEDLAC, and with the really strong and positive contribution made by business, organized labor, and the community constituency. Some of the members of our working stream on comms and the NEDLAC partnership have joined us today. So I do hope that you are with us. And if those of you are here, I'd like to thank you and look forward to us building that communication partnership as we had with the national effort. So over to you, please, Beggy, for those last two, if you may.
Thank you, Michael, for that. I think the one with regards to Quebec in terms of the projects, as you know, that the first unit at Quebec, we are currently busy with that projects up to August. And the next one is following from the later part of this year. So definitely we would have done all the upgrade of Quebec, especially now we are left with the steam generator replacement. On the last one, on the new bit windows for emergency, I thought my colleagues from transmission are not here. So let's come back, Chair, Michael, with that one, because I don't have those details here now. Thanks.
Yeah. In fact, I'm sorry to put you in the corner there. I had thought, Terence, to say to you that maybe that is something we can pick up. I'll ask Mr. Baloy and Peliswa and David to make a note of that. But we do.
I can respond. It's going through because I'm sorry. I mean,
please
doesn't see the line of sight from the reporting, but it is in the final stages of broad approval, Terence. Okay.
Thanks, Rudy. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're calling it a day. Obviously, you know where we are. We ever ready, ever available. We've already had a few calls for media interviews from yourselves. And I don't know if my lights just went out, but that's my demand management strategy, because it's only the switch off. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And we really do put energy onto rejoining each week. Each week we can look at different themes. I have not forgotten those members who've asked us to please focus in a bit on the work stream 6, the crime fighting initiative. So we've not forgotten that. We were due just before the cabinet changes to deal with that one, but we will pick it up again. Thank you so much, members of the media, for joining us. I'd like to thank the team of GSAS and the ministry, and particularly my colleagues Rudy Dix and his team for the outstanding work they're doing to keep us as government on our toes. Our media briefing is drawn to a close, again with that appeal that I make, and I'm calling out my broadcasting colleagues, I'm calling out some of the big print storyliners. Let's see what we can do as a nation, working to at least help with that first emergency measure of really cutting down what we don't need to use, so that those people who need it can use it. Thank you very much. We'll see you next Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Enjoy the weekend.